Warning, this podcast contains heavy spoilers for not just one movie, but entire franchises. We highly recommend going and watching these movies before listening to us as a companion piece that stitches all the timelines into one creepy, crime-ridden story. There will be no more spoiler warnings. We do not break character. After this, there is no turning back. You've been warned. Hit the music.
You are talking about the nonsensical ravings of a lunatic mind.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
It's alive! It's
So I was looking for serial killer jokes to start this off with.
Uh-huh.
There ain't that many of them. There's the usual one everyone knows, and that's the hitchhiker is on the side of the road hitching a lift, and finally someone picks him up, and he gets in, and he's like, "Oh, thank you, I've been out there so long, thank you for picking me up. But tell me, why aren't you worried that I might be a serial killer, you know, being a hitchhiker and all?" And the man in the driver's side says, "Oh, be a coincidence for two of us to be." Yeah, it's a lame one. It's the same one that goes around all the time. This one isn't too bad. It's not really a serial killer. It's just a killer one. A mob dragged a man into a police station for running over 11 people while shouting, "Monster! Murder! Killer!" The policeman dispersed the crowd and began to interrogate the suspect. The policeman, "Tell me what happened." The suspect, "Sir, I was driving home within the speed limit when my brakes failed. I had no choice but to either crash the car into the group of 10 people or to swerve into the direction of a single person. Am I a monster for deciding to swerve into the single person?" Policeman, "No, that sounds like a difficult yet reasonable decision to make. But tell me, how did you end up killing 11 people?" Suspect, "Well, that asshole ran towards the other 10. Hello and welcome to It's Alive podcast. This is a true crime paranormal interstellar podcast covering unbelievable stories that sound like they were ripped straight from the pages of a Hollywood script. I'm your host, the man of many names, the outlaw Harley Ray, the bruiser Bronson, Dr. H.R. Smokenstein, THC, or you can call me Josh for short. And with me as always is my very own scream queen, the perfect combination of beauty and brains, the bride and Smokenstein, the India Hardy, expert, the guts and gore, the gorgeous, the sexy Aimee Rose.
Hi.
And this week we are back in the world of crime and murder as we look at one of the nastiest murder sprees in the history of New York City. Yes, this week we are talking all about Peter Bunch, or as he is better known in the media, the New York Ripper. So how many rippers can you name? Seems to be a popular nickname amongst killers.
Well, there's this one, and then there's the obvious Jack the Ripper.
I'll never get over Jack. I hate unsolved cases. They frustrate me. You know, I'd start reading and learning about a killer only to, you know, get to the end of the story and realise I'm never going to know who's behind the mask.
Yeah, but you know what you're getting into with a Jack the Ripper story. Like, you know that it's going to stay unsolved. And I actually feel the same way about the Zodiac Killer.
That's because you go in with a little hope that they still might catch him, but the frustration only grows as the years pass and no progress. I mean, let's face it, chances are the Zodiac is long dead, if it was only one person.
And here we go with the conspiracy theories again.
Well, there is a conspiracy theory to it. I mean, we saw it as well with the Son of Sam. It's actually very, very similar to the Son of Sam cult conspiracy that we discussed on Real Monsters this week when we were doing all New York. You can check out the mini monsters now. It's a really long one, and it's like 40 minutes this week or for just that episode.
It's long enough.
But he had the same thing, like where they kind of suspected, where he kind of played into it, Berkowitz did, because he was like, "Yep, there's a cult, it's not just me, there's a bunch of us." But obviously we never even caught a suspect for the fucking Zodiac, so it's just a working theory that because so many of the descriptions were different and because the methods were slightly different, that maybe it was a kind of murder group that was running around killing people. No, there's nothing to fucking outside the fact that they know that they fucking descriptions were different, and you see that in some of the mock-ups, the drawings and stuff like that they have that they're a little different. But yeah, that's kind of all there is really to that one, to be honest.
But I mean, like, you could apply that to Jack the Ripper as well. They reckon that there's American Jack the Ripper.
Oh, yeah.
But I mean, it's there. I mean, like, even if this is all
H.H. Holmes is Jack the Ripper.
That's bullshit. I do not believe that for a second. And even with the Zodiac, if it's all true, it happened back in the 60s. So even if the people involved there were in their 20s at the time, they'd all be in their 80s now. So even if they're still alive, they don't have long to go before they've gotten away with it. So it will remain unsolved.
Age means nothing. The Golden State Killer Joseph James D'Angelo was 73 when he was arrested active between 1974 and 1986. It took police over 40 years to get this guy, and he committed way more crimes than the Zodiac. D'Angelo is suspected of 120 plus burglaries as the Visalia ransacker, 50 plus rapes as the East Area rapist, and 13 plus murders as the original Night Stalker.
And that's why he was free as long as he was. The police and media believed his work to be that of 3 or more men all working independently of each other. Like, they saw it as a coincidence that as soon as the ransacker burglaries stopped in one area, the rape started in another, and as soon as the rape stopped, the murder starts.
Keep in mind, though, it's the 70s and 80s. You don't have the internet, and different police precincts weren't exactly known for cooperating all that well with one another.
It's because of the police system over there. You have to hit certain numbers to unlock certain levels of funding, and if your precinct isn't performing and getting results, your fundings drop. Like, they do the same shit there with the schools. Like, better results are better funding. Like, you'd think they'd see the obvious. If you're not getting the results, then you'd need to invest in that area like we do here. Like, the place getting results doesn't need the extra help.
Yeah, well, D'Angelo should have been that wake-up call that they needed when it came to policing the job. You know, they should have known it would be a lot easier if everyone was working together, and you see that now a lot more with the way things are.
Yeah, well, they can't really hold out on each other anymore. Like, once the crime is in the system, any police officer with the right clearance can access it. Add in the fact that DNA is such a huge part of crime fighting now and has helped unmask killers like BTK and D'Angelo. Like, it helps that in some countries and in America, some states have taken to keeping the DNA of dangerous convicts on file.
Makes you think, though, when BTK and D'Angelo were committing their crimes and coming all out over the gaff, it wasn't even in the realm of possibility that their bonk juice could get them caught. Fingerprints, maybe hair or clothes fibers, but erectoplasm, no fucking way. And years later, that love gravy, along with our curiosity and the rise of genealogy websites in the case of the Golden State Killer, got both of these guys caught.
D'Angelo was caught through a genealogy website and his own rubbish, wasn't it?
Yeah, they got samples from his car door and a tissue he left in the rubbish on the curb for collection. Nasty.
Yep. Imagine having to go through that.
I know, yeah. It was some distant cousin that put the family DNA on the system. So investigators who had been on this case for decades were up for trying anything. So they took a little bit of the DNA collected at the crime scenes and sent it to GED match. Or is it GED match?
No,
is that what they call
GED match, GED match, yeah.
Results identified 10 to 20 people who had the same great-great-great-grandparents as the Golden State Killer. A team of 5 investigators working with genealogist Barbara Ray Venter used this list to construct a large family tree. From this tree, they established 2 suspects. One was ruled out by a relative's DNA test, leaving D'Angelo as the main suspect.
And with Raider, they pretty much knew that they had their guy before DNA confirmed it, because he had sent them the floppy disk with his shit poems and drawings and letters on it, and a quick search by the IT guys in the FBI, and they could see that the files had been last modified by Dennis at the Christ Lutheran Church. And a quick Google of the church, and they found that Dennis Rader was the president of the church council there, which gave them enough evidence to obtain a warrant to test a pap smear taken from Rader's daughter at the Kansas State University Medical Clinic. DNA tests showed a familial match between the pap smear and the sample from Wiggerle's fingernails. Am I saying her name properly? Weggerly's fingernails. This indicated that the killer was closely related to Rader's daughter, and combined with the other evidence was enough for the police to arrest Rader.
All right, good enough for the pricks, both of them. Fucking hell.
I thought the floppy disk on its own would have been enough to put the nail in the coffin.
Well, not really.
But I suppose somebody else could have got it and framed him.
I mean, what if somebody's... Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. If it's a communal fucking computer, that could have just been signed into whoever was in charge of the computers or whoever was in charge of the church. You know, anybody could have, from the church, could have used it.
And that's why everybody has different profiles.
But obviously it led them to someone who they could test. I mean, if they tested him and he was wrong, then they'd know, at least they'd have it narrowed down to someone who uses the computer in this church. So, you know, it did help. Mm-hmm. I'll be honest, though, this isn't the direction I was expecting the show to go when I asked how many rippers you could name. We got into Jack, and then now we're like, you know, talking DNA, GSK and BTK. All over again. Those guys seem to be a fucking constant fucking...
You want rippers?
Yep, I want rippers. Give me rippers.
There's the New York Ripper, Jack the Ripper, the Athens Ripper, the Atlanta Ripper, the Blackout Ripper, the Canadian Ripper, the Chicago Rippers, Craigslist Ripper, Dallas, the French Rippers, Gainesville, Gansu and Granny Ripper, the Guangzhou Ripper, the Ipswich Ripper, Joel the Ripper, who you covered on Mini Monsters Monday, and we discuss Unreal Monsters only on Patreon for $5 a month for the first 7 days are free. The Lisbon Ripper, the Mexican Ripper, the Novoralsk Ripper, the Red Ripper, also known as the Rostov Ripper, the Rhine-Ruhr Ripper, the Ripper Jayanadan, the Sanas Ripper, the Serbian Ripper, the Ypsilanti Ripper, and the Yorkshire Ripper, Peter Sucklet.
And if you come back next week on our Instagram, we'll have her doing all that to the theme of the Animaniacs.
The New York Ripper, Jack the Ripper.
I was reading through some of those Rippers, right? And Granny Ripper was not as fun as I thought it was going to be.
Granny Ripper doesn't sound fun, John.
I thought it was a granny who was a ripper.
No. A Granny Ripper rips the granny.
I wasn't far off. She is a woman in her late 60s to 70s who was murdering other fucking women and people around her age.
So she was a Granny Ripper who was
wasn't as fun as I thought she'd be. I mean, you look at Nanny Dot. She's got that fun nanny look about her. Do you know? That's what I was expecting.
One photo, Josh.
Yeah.
I would say, though, if she was offering me gingerbread, I'd be out. No problem.
See, it's it. Nanny Dot could kind of fool you.
Weird.
Careful. Anyway, the Yorkshire Ripper actually reminds me a lot of our subject today, the New York Ripper, Peter Bunch.
Because they're both rippers named Peter that target young women and sex workers?
Yeah, more the targets and the style than the names, though. It's kind of like Dahmer and Dennis Nielsen's. They seem like the US-UK counterparts of each other. Both quiet, strange loners, homosexuals in a time when you still had to keep that kind of on the down low. Both seem to kill out of loneliness. True, Dahmer had a thing for dead bodies, but I think the psychology of it is that if they're corpses, then they can't run away and leave him alone, you know?
Yeah.
And then you have Nielsen, who similarly killed to keep his victims from leaving him alone, but I don't think showed much signs that he enjoyed the dead body. I don't think he was a necrophile as far as I think he did. I think he fooled around with the bodies, but I don't think that was the main purpose of it. You know, whereas Dahmer was cuddling into the bodies and playing with them afterwards.
Yeah.
I think it was more about the conversation and having a friend around, you know?
Conversation.
But he used to prop them up on chairs and chat to them and play music for them and watch TV with them and stuff, like, you know?
Yeah.
They were his company until they decayed too much, and then he'd, you know, have to find a way to dispose of them. Just a quick tip for aspiring lonely homosexual serial killers. Please do not flush your dead bodies down the toilet. It will clog them up. You will get caught. And when you get caught, don't tell them it's fucking chicken from KFC, you idiot.
That's just fucking
That's what
weird.
he told them. The plumber came along, right?
Yeah.
Tried to unblock the fucking drain, and he starts picking out bones from the fucking drain and clumps of fucking meat and stuff like that. And Nielsen is down there over his shoulder going, yeah, looks like KFC. It's like, fucking idiot.
Oh, it's so fucking
Our
awkward.
kid put fucking regular baby wipes down the toilet one time instead of the flushable wipes, and we had to have a company come out and flush our fucking drains.
So fucking
what
bad.
Are you doing?
So
putting
bad.
Fucking human it's just no sense. No.
I wonder what the KFC was doing down the toilet in the first place. And if it was bad enough to flush it down the toilet the first time, why did you order more?
Continue to go KFC, because that's a lot of KFC.
Maybe
dude.
this bucket will be better.
Was Cartman hanging out here?
No, but he was definitely having sex with the corpses. I just looked it up. Like, it seems identical to Dahmer's fantasies, to be honest. Like, even crazier, they both started killing in 1978, although Nielsen was caught after just 5 years, and Dahmer managed to stay active all the way up to 1991, so 13 years. And I used to work with a woman that lived on the same street as Nielsen, and while all this was going on, and they never had a fucking clue.
Oh, fucking creepy.
Weird.
Which one? He had two houses. This happened twice. He had the first one, he was burning the bodies out the back. He'd say he's having a bonfire, and he'd start burning bodies out the back. And then the second time, he was upstairs and didn't have a garden. So that's why he started flushing them.
The woman's, she didn't say apartment, she said house, number 1. But number 2, she was talking about it so much, I would assume if there was any kind of weird stuff like smoke, she would have been all like, oh yeah, we actually saw the smoke and all that jazz. Like, you know,
well, yeah, but I suppose like it's a house, but usually they're separated into, like, especially in that time,
yeah.
you could have, I mean, you see that when we were watching, was it the Acid Bath? No, the ABC. Which one was the English guy that Tim Roth played?
Oh, that was a Brenton Place.
And he had, that kind of situation where the sitting room and kitchen downstairs would be kind of turned into one apartment, and then the bedrooms upstairs would be modified to have a kitchen up there and a bedroom. So it was like you could.
I hate that story. That was Jodie Comer as well, wasn't it? Pretty sure.
It was. I think it was, yeah. Now that you mention it. He lasted. So Dahmer lasted what? Like a good fucking 7 years longer, 8 years longer than him. But the American versions always go on longer. The US office has way more episodes than the UK version. Same with Ghost and Shameless.
And they're always funnier, Chucker.
Well, actually, that probably ran longer in the UK. But the Gallagher family stays in the US version for the entire run. The UK version only had the Gallaghers for like the main focus for like the first few seasons before they introduced the whole estate as fucking characters. And it was still awesome.
Oh yeah, right? It was.
Both Shamelesses are very, very good for very different reasons.
I think my favourite is the UK one though. Hands down. I liked it.
But they're very different comedies.
Fiona annoyed me a lot though in the US one.
Very different comedies. I mean, the English one is very more slapstick and stupid. Kind of real, kind of off the wall crazy. Whereas the American one, you can almost feel their struggle at times, and you feel bad for them at times. Where there's more drama and more kind of depression in the
I would
American
agree
one.
with you, but I think maybe it's just kind of the part of the world where we're from. Sometimes, like when you're watching the UK show, it's like, oh yeah, I know a person like that.
Oh yeah, I know, right? I knew everybody on that fucking estate. I knew a version of them from around the town. No problem.
Yeah. And Dahmer and Nielsen are exactly the same as US remakes of UK shows.
Yes. Do you think the Americans just let Dahmer have a longer run so they could be, one up in the Brits? Our Gay Cannibal Killer is way better than yours.
In that case, who's tougher, Sutcliffe or Bunch?
Sutcliffe. What the fuck is that? Like Ben Affleck playing Sutcliffe. Sutcliffe gets this one with a run of 5 years and 13 confirmed kills. Bunch, on the other hand, only lasted a few months before he was caught, although his story was bound to be a fast one, with his focus being solely on revenge and his plan being a little convoluted, to say the least. So we've danced around it enough. Let's get into it. Let's talk about the New York Ripper Peter Bunch and the reign of terror he brought down on the city that never sleeps in the year 1982. Hey kids, can't get enough of that blood, guts and gore? Then head on over to our Patreon, where for just $5 a month you'll get exclusive access to our true crime show Real Monsters and horrific history tales from Playing with Bones with Aimee Rose, along with early access to our minisodes and ad-free access to everything else. All this and loads more horror-tastic extras from the Horrorverse. So what are you waiting for? Permission? Go nick your parents' card today and subscribe now at patreon.com/It's Alive Alive Pod. Remember, that's It's Alive Alive Podcast, a really, really fake true crime horror podcast. It's Alive Alive, all the guts and gore with none of the guilt. Peter Bunch was born May 22nd, 1942 to parents Theodore and Eleanor Bunch, and would be the couple's only child. Brought up in Chicago in a working class home, Peter was a shy and reserved but highly intelligent child. Originally Roman Catholic, Peter, under the guidance of his parents, would eventually become an atheist, choosing to preach common sense and scientific facts over what they deemed as silly fairy tales, instead nurturing Peter's intelligence and budding love for physics and mathematics.
Do you think that played a factor in his decision making later? I mean, at that time in history, religion, especially the Catholic Church, it would have been ingrained in everyday life and very powerful in world leaders' decision making. I mean, you see the impact they had in Ireland all the way up until the late 90s. I do think that being an atheist at that point would have been a major taboo, something that he maybe even got bullied about.
Maybe, but to be honest, I don't think religion really plays that much of a factor in their mental state. I mean, being a psychopath or sociopath means little to no empathy exists in you. You believe that the world is yours and everyone and everything in it is just there for your amusement. I think with a God complex like that, it's hard to believe they would see themselves as second to anyone. I think they have to see themselves as something more than humanity, and in controlling someone's fate, the power of that decision, to let them live or die, it has to indicate that they believe they are God on earth. Like.
But then why kill so often? Should they not be loving and merciful?
Yeah, if you lead by words and not actions. The Christian God is known for being jealous, egotistical, vain, and vengeful. Sounds like a killer to me.
So how do you explain guys like Gary Ridgway even, or again BTK, who are big churchgoers and active in the church community while still killing?
It's a nice cover story. You know, no one suspects old Holy Joe. I mean, hardcore Christians are known for being a little strange, a little over the top or intense, so a killer blends into the community easily. On top of that, while the God might be vengeful, generally Christian people, while a little overbearing in their beliefs, are quite nice people, and by the laws of their belief, have to welcome followers of the Lord in with open arms. So even if you are a bit strange, they'll accept you, and when you get caught, they'll probably support you afterwards and forgive you. So
plus, yeah, and if you go all born again in prison, it looks good with the parole board a few decades later when you're old and seem harmless.
Either way, we can agree that in this case, the family's religious practices or lack thereof isn't the catalyst for Peter's eventual spiral into lunacy and ensuing murder spree. Now, I know when it comes to serial killers or spree killers, you generally picture some dull, weird loner with an at best 2-digit IQ. Guys like, you know, Geen, Dahmer, Rollins, or Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole.
Yeah, and Ridgway was another dummy. Like, it's crazy when you think about it. These days, the guys you listed would be seen to have special needs in school from an early age, and they'd be seen as vulnerable people in the community.
They'd be watched a bit closer anyway.
Yeah, well, there's that. But I mean, it's crazy how someone who struggles so much to fit into society can keep top investigators baffled for years at a time.
Like we say most week, the investigators are trying to make sense of from, you know, the senseless. You're talking about killings that have no logical motive, and more often than not, the victims will have no link to the killer. On top of that, at the time these guys were all active, DNA wasn't a factor. So, you know, now add in what you said, it seems crazy to think that Larry down the road who has trouble tying his own shoes could be a serial killer mastermind, so they don't come under suspicion until way down the line.
Or like in the case of Ed Kemper, they get sick of it and hand themselves over. Did you know that he had to call the police on himself 2 or 3 times before the police would even come out and have a look at the situation?
A perfect example. He wanted to be a cop, but he wasn't bright enough for it and was way too tall. But he used to hang out in the local cop bar and talk shop with the officers that drank there. It's one of the ways he actually stayed one step ahead of them, because he was getting all the new developments in the case straight from the horse's mouth.
See, I wouldn't put Kemper in the low IQ section. He was smart enough to stay close to police, and he managed to fool multiple psychiatrists that he was perfectly sane and just a big gentle giant who had a tough childhood and snapped.
Yeah, by being a model inmate, he got some perks, including helping out around the hospital, leaving him alone to look through files and study how certain tests were administrated, learning the correct sort of behaviour required to deem himself safe for society again. And I would agree with you, I think he is an intelligent and manipulative man, but I also think that he was stuck in a fantasy world, and paired with his size may have made him come across as your stereotypical big, dumb, gentle giant type, leading the police to assume he was dumb and soft, and, you know, too soft to commit such a horrific crime. So I would say he was intelligent, but I would say lacked in common sense and was stuck in a fucking fantasy in his own mind, you know. Which brings me to the next point, because whereas one stereotype is a dribbling idiot weirdo, the other common depiction of a serial killer, you know, is the mastermind evil genius who loves nothing more than to play a good old-fashioned game of cat and mouse with the authorities. Now, while the movies may depict these guys as being diabolical masterminds, the truth really is that they're pretty much the same as their big dummy counterparts. The killings, the hiding in plain sight, it's all the same, just they use their intelligence and higher social standing to cover their tracks. So just like Larry down the road, who can't tie his shoelaces, couldn't possibly be the killer, then neither could the charismatic, college-educated, life of the party and friend to all Ted be, you know? So
you're obviously referencing Bundy there.
Yeah, we'll talk about hiding in plain sight. The man was studying to be a lawyer and helping in political campaigns, so instantly it's a case of trying to pick out the killer psychopath amongst the functioning non-killing psychopaths. Not to mention he worked for a suicide helpline in his spare time.
You have to wonder where he got all the time to do the killing.
I know, right? I can barely manage this podcast weekly, let alone study to be a lawyer, work in politics, do charity work, and have a fairly demanding pastime.
I was actually reading an interesting article about this earlier in the week, and it's from the Express.co.uk, and I know that's an English paper. I'm not sure what its reputation is like, but I thought this was an interesting take on Ted's time working for the suicide helpline. The column was written by a man called Callum Hoare and was published in May of 2019. According to psychologist Daryl Turner, it's not very surprising that Bundy would seek out this type of work. Psychopaths will very often put themselves in a position to, in a weird way, learn what normal people are like so that they can blend in better by faking emotions that they learn from other people. Mr. Turner says that Bundy's work there would have given him insight into what people need to hear and feel in order to be persuaded. He added, as someone who made a life study of manipulating other people, I think it makes sense that he would get a job like that. There's this grandiose sense of self that comes along with psychopathy. Christ.
It's hard.
Isn't it?
I hate that word.
This sense that you are someone special and that you are a powerful person, and a need to feel powerful and a need to feel control. And so I think that working at a suicide hotline satisfied that need in Bundy as well. It's absolutely a possibility that it made him a better serial killer. I wonder, is it kind of like along the lines of, and I don't know. I mean, it's not fucking harsh. It's fucking Bundy. Was it a thing of like he could like legitimately say to this person, "Yeah, you should kill yourself"? Like, was that in his head? Like, and then he could kind of like
constantly surrounded by other people and other boats.
Oh, I know, but like, you know, like that kind of like kind of taste of power. Like, so like these were very like. People, they could be very easily influenced in that mindset. Do you know, maybe wrong one thing.
From what I heard, he did good work there. He was constantly trying to edge it. But I think like what this person's saying is that it was just the ability to see what somebody in distress might need to hear to calm them down, keep them in the right position for him to deal with. So that's how he learned from it, yeah. So the one sign of humanity in Bundy is cancelled out because he was using it as a serial killer finishing school. Scary shit. But yeah, he is definitely an example of an intelligent serial killer. I mean, the man defended himself in court and was complimented by the judge on his ability. Another intelligent killer, Ted, was the Unabomber Ted Kaczynski, and his background is pretty similar to our subject today, Peter Bunch. Just like Kaczynski, Bunch was a bit of a child prodigy, studying mathematics and physics from a young age. In fact, he was so bright that he found himself quickly moved up a few grades to a level that matched his IQ.
What was he like socially? I mean, like, was he smart and well liked like the nerds of today, or was he smart and awkward like the nerds of the past?
From what I hear, he was pretty well liked. Awkward at times, like later after his crimes came to light, old college friends said stuff like he was a nice guy, but there was always something a little off about him, or that he was sometimes seemed to get confused in social situations, like his brain would glitch and he suddenly became super awkward, like he had forgotten how to read social cues.
That happens to the best of us.
Oh yeah, a lot of the time it was put down to his age. You know, being pushed ahead a few grades meant he was in college by the time he was 15, so all his peers are like 3 or 4 years older than him as well.
I always wondered, because you don't really see a whole load of that in Ireland, but you would hear of it in America, like kids being like way on. Like, is it bad for? Obviously, it has to be bad for their social development.
Could be, yeah. I mean, again, I would say if I was 15 going in amongst 17, 18, 19 year olds, I probably would have been okay, because well, no, it depends again. If you're talking about like if you have a bit of charisma about you, a bit of social fucking ability about you, you should be fine. I mean,
see, I think I had social ability, but I was naive as fuck at 15.
Awkward, yeah, but see, it depended for me who I was around. Like I said, I was able to kind of switch up and switch it on every now and again. And sometimes I struggled, especially when I was a teenager. I struggled in front of people. I could be socially awkward. Yeah, I remember going to the Gaeltacht in Ballyvorney when I was 13. And making the decision going there that I wasn't going to be in trouble. I was going to be out and fucking loud.
Half the battle, yeah.
And it was the exact same case. I was 13 years of age. I was hanging out with all 16, 17 year olds. They all fucking loved me. Yeah. Do you know? They just wanted me around. And it was because I was acting a fool and all that stuff. No, it helped that I was overly confident because I could speak Irish already and none of them could. So it wasn't exactly an issue for me. I could be cool as fuck. And so I suppose like
one-upmanship in Ireland.
I'm the one that was ahead of you. So I could see how Bunch could be smarter than everybody else in that sense of the maths and physics side, and still kind of get on if he made the decision to kind of be out there and extroverted, like, you know?
Yeah.
Nevertheless, he did have friends in college and he was a pretty popular guy, so he was doing okay.
Yeah.
It helped that he was willing to help some of the popular kids with their homework, but all in all, everyone from his past was pretty shocked to find out that old Petey Bunch had committed such violent crimes. Everyone, that is, except for his ex-wife, Bonnie. Peter met Bonnie, who was attending NYU in 1960. Peter was 18, she was 25 years old. So a little bit of an age gap there. But apparently they clicked with Peter showing his charm early on to get the young woman's attention.
Yeah, I was reading about her, and they met when they were on the student council together, and she said the first few years with him were bliss, but there were some red flags. He used to get awfully frustrated when he got stuck on work problems, often not sleeping for days, and on a few occasions lashing out violently, trashing his home office and verbally abusing Bonnie. She said at first it was easy to disregard this behaviour, believing it to just be the quirks of a brilliant mind. She said sometimes she would leave for her mother's house when she saw the freakouts coming on, but after a few days she'd feel guilty and have to return home to make sure Peter was still okay and not dead or anything.
Apparently, it was easy to see when the stress was building him too, because he developed a small bit of a stutter, which he would describe to friends as being like a brick wall that was built between his brain and his mouth. That he'd have the words, but his mouth wouldn't make the sounds. Or that he'd know the answer to problems, like, you know, it was buried deep in his brain on the tip of his tongue, but it just wouldn't come out. Kind of like when you know an actor's name, but it just won't come to you. Or when you wake up from a really vivid dream and you're trying to remember it, and you have tiny snippets, but it's slowly fading away as you're trying to remember.
So fucking frustrating.
Frustrating enough to kill a bunch of people?
Wanted to, but not to the degree that he went. Like, that's overkill, really.
Thank fuck for IMDb. Eventually, the couple were married in 1967 when Peter was 25 and Bonnie was 32. The pressure was on for Bonnie to have a child. It wasn't easy either. They had 4 miscarriages before finally becoming pregnant with Susie Bunch, who was born on the 9th of October 1972. Now, you know yourself the impact a miscarriage can have on your mental well-being. It's hard to go through that once, let alone repeatedly. Eventually, you might want to give up and pack it in. But the Bunches were persistent and stuck at it until they were finally successful. But unfortunately for them, the joy of the birth of Susie was short-lived, as the child had major health issues from birth. Now, I can't be sure what the original ailments were, but it's said that Susie was a few weeks premature, and even with that was underweight for where she was in that point of the pregnancy. Like, the first few years of Susie's life saw the child in and out of hospital with various different infections and viruses.
Bad immune system. Poor child was always sick, probably.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's a lot of people like ourselves with kids who know how difficult it can be to have a sick child. You're worrying about them, you're worrying about money. Because let's face it, if your kids are really, really, really sick, you need a lot of money, and you will find the cash needed to get them the best treatment possible, even if it means you'll spend the rest of your life in debt.
Yeah.
Thankfully for us, though, our 2 kids have been healthy. Just the usual kid stuff here and there, chickenpox, flus, tummy bugs, and, you know, other everyday unavoidable fucking illnesses, touch wood. But you see, couples with kids in and out of hospital, it can be a real strain on the family. So when you're in a position as dire as the Bunches, you really need the father and the mother of the child to come together. Be strong and be a team. What you don't need is for one of the parents to start acting like a child and for the other to disassociate from the situation so much that they end up leaving.
So Susie just got worse with time?
Yep. At age 6, she developed a rare kind of bone cancer and entered hospital, where she would remain until her death in 1982. Now, I said earlier that Peter was known to be a charming, smart and good-looking guy in public. But as pressure mounted, he was known to get a little nastier. In public, that is. In private, he was known to get much, much nastier. The pressure was usually down to his job as a physicist, equations and problems that he couldn't make out, make work. But as health problems with Susie persisted and medical bills began to rise, the slightly quirky physicist became more and more unhinged. Disillusioned with his lot in life and the constant pressure of money, Peter found himself becoming more and more resentful towards the world and anyone who was doing even a little bit better than he was. Would have fit great in Ireland.
Yeah.
This led to him almost constantly chastising his exhausted wife, Bonnie, as she took on the lion's share of the work in regards to taking care of Susie's medical care.
What would he give her shit about?
Sorry?
What would he give her shit about?
It ranged from stuff like, why do you look like shit? Why can't you put more effort into your looks like my friends' wives? You're embarrassing to be seen with. The apartment's a mess. You never clean. Where's my dinner? To more extreme stuff like, you did this to Susie. Your eggs are rotten. You fucked up the pregnancy. If Susie dies, I'll kill you.
Oh, what a way to lose her.
Now, you can imagine what a stressed out, exhausted woman might say to shit like that, especially coming from this spoiled, entitled little shit like Peter. So she gave it back as good as she got.
Fucking right she did. Fucking putting up with that kind of shit while you're trying to look after your sick child. Fuck him.
Yeah, well, Peter didn't like that one bit, and that's when the physical abuse started. She spoke back and she got backhanded. No, that's bad enough and not acceptable in any way, shape or form, but it will be mild compared to what would happen to her after the cancer diagnosis in 1978. Once Susie was diagnosed with cancer, Peter became extremely violent, to the point that he would regularly knock Bonnie out cold.
So was he angry at her for, as he said, fucking up the pregnancy and making Susie wrong, or is he angry the child is getting all the attention?
Angry at the world, from what I could make out. Bonnie was just in the firing line all the time, an easy target for him. Okay, so he wasn't hands-on with the caregiving, but he did show love towards Susie. And I think it's like what we spoke about a few times before, where a psychopath might not love you as a person, but they do love you as a possession of theirs. And I think a lot of his frustrations around life were based on the fact that even though he had a good job and he had a family, nothing was going to plan. The perfect wife was a mess. The perfect daughter was sick or, in his mind, broken. The perfect home and bank account eluded him because of the constant medical drain, bill drain on his income. So, he's just...
Yeah, welcome to real life, Petey. So if he didn't take part in the hospital stuff and was so resentful towards his family for his current circumstance, how did he show any love at all towards Susie?
He would visit nearly every day, and if he couldn't for some reason visit, he would call Susie on the phone. He would spend about an hour at the end of each day with Susie, colouring, playing games, making her laugh and reading to her, usually her favourite book, The Little Duck, performing the story more than reading it, adopting funny voices for each of the animals, his duck impression being the best. Bonnie would later say it was the only time you'd see the old charming Peter again, as he lit up the small hospital room, helping both himself and Susie forget about their sorrows, if only for a short time. And it was a short time, because as soon as Peter parted ways with Susie each evening, he would almost instantly revert back to the irritated, nasty little man that he had become over the years. Then the drinking started.
Oh, bad mix. He's already abusive, but booze on top of that, and it's not going to end well.
Yeah. He took to leaving the hospital after his visits with Susie and heading to the nearest dive bar from the medical facility. There, he would stay for hours getting hammered before heading home to beat and berate his wife before passing out for the night. This went on for over a year before one day it all went even further into the shit. Susie's cancer had begun to spread, originating in the bone around her left shoulder. It had spread through the arm. The fear was it would spread to the rest of the body next. So the decision was made and the arm was amputated when the girl was just 9 years old.
That's sad.
The diagnosis going forward was not good. While they believed the girl could live another year or two, her quality of life would be awful, with her mainly being confined to a hospital bed to see out her days. A decision had to be made in regard to Susie's immediate future, with each parent having a very different opinion on what should be done than the other. Peter, although frustrated with his lot in life, was not ready to lose anything of his to anyone, not even the Grim Reaper. He wanted to pour more money into her treatment, keeping her alive but in pain for as long as possible.
I think here you really see the psychopath love over regular love come into play. The mother most likely doesn't want to lose her child, but understands she's in pain. Like, she's not living life the way she is. She's just dying very slowly. But with Peter, the pain isn't a factor because he can't empathize with it. He doesn't understand the concept of someone else's pain. Like, he only worries about himself and what he'll be losing.
Yeah, well, he insisted and he won. And by won, I mean he beat the absolute shit out of Bonnie every time she mustered up the courage to share her thoughts on the matter. But enough was enough for Bonnie, who could only withstand the abuse while some hope of life still existed for her daughter. But now, broken and in deep despair, decided she couldn't stay to watch her daughter die in such a manner.
Also, if Peter's beating her into unconsciousness and blaming her for the child's condition, like, how will he react when Susie eventually passes away? He'd have her killed, no doubt about it.
Judging by his actions later, I 100% agree with you. According to Bonnie, it all came down to one major event that finally made her snap and run away. About a week after the decision had been made to keep Susie committed to the hospital and for treatment to prolong her life to continue, neither parent had been to see little Susie. In fact, she had only seen them once after the amputation of her arm. Little did she know that would be her last time seeing either of them, although they would keep in contact with her by daily phone calls. The night of the final decision was a particularly cruel night of beatings and mocking for Bonnie. But they soon subsided as Peter went on a bender, leaving her alone to plan her escape and pack. Unfortunately for her though, she would have to endure one more horrific night in Peter's clutches before she could get away.
Poor woman. I couldn't imagine abandoning her child, especially in her time of need like this. But how could you blame Bonnie? Her husband could snap and kill her at any time, and her daughter has been forced to die slowly in front of her, and she's taken a daily beating on top of it. How could anyone be expected to make a clear, rational decision in that situation?
Yeah, it only gets worse before she gets out. You see, Peter's bender started on a Monday and Bonnie had no idea how long it would last. She had friends in Brazil who had heard her story and offered to give her a new home with them if she made her way down. The next flight to Brazil that Bonnie could get was due to leave Thursday at 5 p.m.
Oh, that's a long time to hope he won't come home. Could she not stay with family or something in the meantime?
Bonnie was an only child with 2 only child parents. So no aunts, no uncles, no cousins. Her parents and grandparents had passed at this stage, so she was very much alone in the world. Peter and Susie, her only family to speak of. But you're right, 4 days was a long time to expect Peter to stay out of the house without coming home for a change of clothes or money or something. And on Wednesday night around 8 p.m, he came stumbling into the house, drunk, angry, and not alone.
Cree Party brought another woman back in with him.
Nope, another man.
Ooh, plot twist.
Not really. This was a local scumbag he had taken to hanging out with in a bar. A Greek immigrant with a record of drug abuse and sexual abuse, Mikas Scellenda. Yeah. Was just as nasty a character as Peter himself. So 2 peas in a pod here. Although Mikas was more obvious to the everyman. He was rough looking with bad tattoos, a few scars, always looking dirty even when he had had a bath. You know the kind.
Yeah.
And to top it off, he was missing 2 fingers on his right hand, the baby and the ring finger.
Ooh.
And that always is a sign of you owed somebody money.
Yeah.
Meeting in a dive bar close to the hospital, Mikas and Peter bonded over their hatred of women and all they put them through. Poor guys. They shared fantasies of enslaving all women and making them subservient to men again. Mikas would drone on and on about the sexual torture he would put the women through, stating it wasn't really torture because with him, how could they not enjoy it?
Oh, you.
Peter, on the other side, would forget all about the sex and instead talk solely about crazy torture techniques he would employ to make the women pay for all they had done.
I want to keep both of them in the balls so bad.
Probably even more so after this. The night Bonnie got to meet Mikas, and with only 2 hours to go until her permanent departure from New York, the 2 deviants decided to play out some of their fantasies on the poor grieving mother and wife. I say grieving because to her, Susan was gone, and for her, Peter was dead in her mind too. At least the Peter she had originally met.
Yeah.
First, Peter began with the usual barrage of insults and threats before the inevitable beating began. All as Mikas laughed and cheered in the background. She then said she blacked out, only to wake up and find Mikas on top of her, her arms bound and her husband now laughing and cheering along, all while he screamed insults at her and suggestions at Mikas. When Mikas was done with her and she had been discarded by him, Peter came rushing back in for another beating, telling her she was a slut and a whore for what she had just done, and told her again how it was all her fault, his shitty life and his dying daughter.
That's disgusting. I should point out it still goes on to this day. I can almost guarantee you this is going on in more than one home in every community across the world.
Yeah, it's fucked up. Fucking hell. Bonnie said later that she was sure she died that night. She said that throughout the whole ordeal, she was terrified that Peter would find her bags packed or realise her clothes were missing from the bedroom closet and just snap. Thankfully, it seemed to pass the drunk psycho's notice, and after he had again knocked the shit out of his wife, he grabbed some money and the men left. Bonnie pulled herself together, patched and cleaned herself up, and left New York hoping to never return. She would later say she heard of Peter's crimes on the news from Brazil and soon after returned to be at Susie's bedside as she passed away. She later wrote a book with ghostwriter Lucio Fulci. That's right, Fulci. Simply titled The New York Ripper, where she detailed her account of the situation and then chronicled the crimes with her commentary as to what Peter may have been thinking or his mindset throughout the massacre.
Okay.
Interesting.
Okay, it's honesty time. We have a confession to make. We suck at socials, no good at Insta, can't send a tweet or an X or whatever that super villain looking motherfucker is calling it now. Stick to your space cars, Elon. But we know you want to chat. You want to be kept updated. You want to be alive all the goddamn time. So we're getting down from the antisocial soapbox and giving this a try. So come chat to us on Insta and Twitter at AliveAlivePod, or hit us up by email at itsalivealivepod@gmail.com. We want to hear from you. Tell us what you like, what you don't like. This is a project. It's still a work in progress, and we just want to give you more what you like and less of what you can't stand. So give us a like, give us a follow. We'll always hit you back, and we'll always try to reply to everyone. So come say hi. We don't bite. Well, at least Aimee doesn't. And she keeps me well fed, so you got nothing to worry about. Now, back to the show. So it obviously didn't take Peter long to realise his wife was missing, and at first it infuriated him that she could abandon both him and Susie in such a time of need. But after more reflection, his mindset changed. Instead of being angry at Bonnie for leaving, he saw it as a chance to reset. Live life as he wanted to, achieve his goals and get the recognition he always felt he deserved in his field or in his social circles.
And I suppose he rationalised not visiting Susie as, if Bonnie gets to bail, then why should I have to visit?
Exactly, only he found it hard to disconnect. The hospital had to have someone to contact for information and consent when it came to treating Susie. So Peter was constantly reminded of her existence, and whatever bit of humanity that was buried deep inside of him compelled him to occasionally ring, but not as himself anymore. It seems he compartmentalized the whole Susie situation by always playing the character of the little duck from her book when he rang, talking to her only in the funny duck voice he had created for the title character. The nursing staff said that by the end of each call, Mr. Bunch would be in an awful state, sometimes angry, ranting and raving at the nurses on the line about his daughter's care, other times crying in hysterics. Either way, he was becoming more and more unhinged.
And now the nurses have to put up with it.
Oh yeah, on top of that, when he was roaring at them, he was doing it in the duck voice.
What?
When he was roaring at them or crying on the phone, he was still in the duck voice.
How would you keep character as a duck when you're crying?
It wasn't a character, it was a personality. It was like a split off of the personality. Compartmentalizing. And a lot of serial killers can do this. They always discussed, like, again, bringing him up, BTK, how he could do what he did and have a family life. It was because these killers have the ability to essentially like split their personality, as in, well, that was that guy and this is this guy. You know, this is family raider and this is killer raider. Yeah. And these are two different people and they're in two different categories, you know? I'm
just trying to imagine what Donald Duck sounded like crying.
Oh, God, I'm not even going to try it. Now, to afford the healthcare and his renewed social life, Peter would need to pull himself together, at least when it came to the public eye. So he cut out drinking, took on more work, and over the next few months got himself back out with his friends from college and from work, building back up his reputation as good old charming Pete. For him, it was all going uphill. The work was difficult but more satisfying. The money had gotten better and his love life was even on the way up as he began to casually date again. This is where things again began to get tricky. See, as he got back out there in the dating pool, he found that he couldn't stand any of the women he went out with. Instead, finding himself fantasizing throughout the whole date about how much he wanted to hurt them. Jesus. I mean, like, he really had to work hard to hold back. It was constantly on his mind, like an itch he had to just fucking scratch.
Yeah.
These feelings were only exasperated by the now weekly phone calls to Susie. Someone had to pay for taking his daughter away. In the meantime, a friend set him up on a blind date with a girl named Faye Majors. Faye was a slightly gullible but highly intelligent and gorgeous young woman who should have been the girl of Peter's dreams, something he recognised as well. And even though he still had a certain amount of contempt for her, she was just the right kind of girl to fit into what used to be his fantasy, but was quickly becoming a plan of action.
Do we know what the plan was?
So obviously his plan was to get revenge on the women of New York by stalking and killing them. But he wanted to make sure he got the message across and got away with the whole thing too. So he began by studying the greats to see where he could improve, learn from their mistakes and become a better killer than they ever were. So he's reading a lot of these fucking serial killer magazines and, you know, True Detective and all this kind of shit.
So how was the asshole going to improve the process?
Well, the biggest revelation he had was to put a layer between him and the victims. Most killers get caught after their description or car make and model get passed on to the police, usually as the killer is in the process of kidnapping or stalking his next victim. So Peter needed someone as perverse and disgusting as him to help him in the procurement of suitable female candidates.
And who better than the man who helped him rape and beat his wife?
Bang on the money. And so Peter went out to reconnect with his nasty ass friend Mikas Scellenda. Needless to say, Scellenda didn't need much convincing, and over a few bottles of vodka the pair planned and schemed their first attack. Scellenda would get the body, then Peter would take their soul. A win-win for the depraved duo.
And now we reach the part of the story where I want to turn off my earphone and go la 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 while Josh covers all the disgusting acts that these two are about to commit.
Oh, you have no idea.
Yeah, see you later.
Their first victim was failed model turned sex worker Anne Lynn. Lynn was last seen working the red light district in the city on the night of Thursday, 4th of March 1982. She was found by a man out walking his dog in the early hours of Sunday morning, the 7th of March. She had been raped multiple times, beaten severely and stabbed 37 times in the head, neck, chest and stomach with defense wounds covering her hands, arms and legs.
Horrific.
The victim seemed random and the crime motiveless. Police were at a loss very early on. That's until the woman's landlord came forward, a small old lady by the name of Mrs. Babette Weisberger. She claimed that before and after the death of Anne Lynn, a man called looking for her. On both occasions, the man spoke like a duck, like an angry Donald Duck, making crazy quacking noises between sentences and all. Who could that be?
So please almost straight away know that they're dealing with the weirdo. Like, would they not have Frank Zito running around at this time?
Frank Zito, the maniac in New York, who we covered in episode 28, he would have been active up until 1980, so this was a little over 2 years later.
Okay.
The cop in charge of this case was Lieutenant Fred Williams, a hard-nosed veteran of the NYPD homicide department and actually helped work the maniac case back in 1980. Not a big role, but he was in the task force assigned to catching him. If cops were unsure as to whether this was the beginning of another serial killing spree or not was answered the following weekend on the Staten Island ferry. Here, student Rosie DePonte was found stabbed and slashed multiple times and left inside an old red VW car. This murder is said to be Bunch's only solo kill, as Scellenda had an airtight alibi and Miss DePonte showed no signs of rape or sexual abuse in general. Upon making connections to this kill and the Lynn case, Lieutenant Williams informed the press that a serial killer was at large. This led to Williams getting a visit at the station by New York's chief of police. Williams' skeptical superior told him not to make any further public announcements about the case to avoid starting a citywide panic. To be honest with you, I thought it was a little bit early as well to be making these kind of claims.
Yeah.
They usually hold back on this shit for a good while. Just as the police chief was leaving, Williams was notified that a man sounding like a duck phoned while he was out at the press conference, wanting to speak with him.
A little validation for the lieutenant.
And enough to get the lieutenant a little extra help from a specialist. The specialist was Dr. Paul Davis of Columbia University. Dr. Davis was a brilliant young psychotherapy professor who was teaching at the school. He consulted on the case throughout and essentially cracked the case by narrowing his suspects down to the Bunch household, where they suspected either Faye or Peter of the killings. He put together a rough profile of the type of man he believed they were looking for and the possible motives that drove him to kill. This, while helpful, did nothing to immediately progress the case, and police were resigned to waiting for more contact or more action from the newly dubbed New York Ripper. They weren't left waiting long, and with this next kill came the first small sign of a lead, with a description of a shady man snooping around before the murder took place. The location, a seedy sex theatre deep in the red light district of New York. Ooh. This was essentially the stage version of porn.
Okay.
You pay the admission price, get your popcorn, head in, take a seat and watch the show, where a couple came out on stage to a bed and did what came natural to them. After the 10 p.m. show on Sunday, March 28, 1982, the body of performer Eva Karova was found in her dressing room. It appears she was killed not long after her last show. The light bulb in her dressing room had been smashed and she was found bled out on the floor after being repeatedly stabbed in the vagina, crotch and thigh, hitting the young woman's femoral artery.
And this is where they got the big break in the case.
I don't know if you'd call it a big break, but it was a break, and at this point the detectives would take any bit of luck they could get.
Yeah.
The break was witnesses had seen Mikas Scellenda sulking around the theatre. One said he even sat in the front row to watch the show before the murder. Now, the police had a description and some distinguishing marks and features to go on, with people describing his tattoos, rough look, and most importantly, that his right hand was missing 2 fingers. Now, Bunch and Scellenda had no idea that the cops even had this description, and they were having the time of their lives. The successful kills had made them more confident, but Scellenda wasn't as thrilled as Peter. You see, out of the first 3 kills, Scellenda had only gotten to rape the first one, with Bunch taking out Rosie DePonte alone in a compulsive crime of convenience and destroying the vagina of Eva Karova with a broken bottle before Mikas could get his turn. So they decided to double up. They still stalked and raped, but they'd also pick up women from BDSM sections of porno paper, classifieds, and if all else fails, they'd just do what they did the first time and kill a sex worker.
Okay.
That was a long-term solution, but short-term, Peter had a fun idea. Getting sick of fame, wanting to get a little closer to the police action, Peter set it up with Mikas to make Faye her next victim. He gave him her train schedule and arranged for the sex pest to herd her in his direction down an alleyway near her stop. Once he had her disabled, Mikas could have his way with her before Peter got in to finish the job. After that, he could talk to police and follow their case through their updates. Again, another move not tried before by other killers. Killing close to you so you can get first-hand updates.
Yeah, because it's dumb as fuck. The aim of the game is to keep the police as far away from you as possible. Like, you don't want your name coming up in their files in any capacity. Plus, if you really did his research, you'd know the love interest is always the police's first suspect in a murder case.
I know, and that's exactly what it does. He becomes a suspect almost directly after speaking to police for the first time. Thankfully, Faye escaped with minor injuries. She said the man with 3 fingers was watching her and stalking her through the train cars and station stop. She said from what she can remember, he began to chase her, and the next thing she remembered, there was a man quacking and slashing at her with a knife. Sounds like a fucking Batman villain. Fuck. She said she managed to break free from the man's grip and made a run for a rundown apartment block where she hid in a rundown flat. There she passed out from blood loss, waking a few hours later in a hospital bed. Peter made sure to play the concerned boyfriend, staying by her side long enough to get his first interaction with Williams and Davis as they questioned a woman on what she could remember.
Okay.
All she could tell them was about the 3-fingered man and how she believed he was the duck culprit. The evidence lined up as it appeared that the assailant had used his left hand in the stabbings, which was obviously the guy's full-fingered hand. The extra manpower was put into finding this man. Unfortunately, the police couldn't work fast enough. Both men, feeling the blue balls from the night before's misfire, decided to go again, but this time with a sure thing. This time using the BDSM personal ads, Mikas picked up Jane Lodge, the very well-off wife of Dr. Lawrence Lodge. Jane, being about 20 years younger than her rich husband, had an agreement in place whereby she could have casual, no-strings sex with strangers as long as she came home and maintained her wifely duties to him too.
Okay, I'm confused. If he's only looking for rough sex and not bothered by the killing, then why didn't he just have consensual sex like this with women like Jane rather than risk his life and freedom to find victims for Peter?
Not sure. The only thought experts have is that he may have gotten an extra kick out of knowing he was setting the women up to die, and even more of a kick out of knowing that the night of hardcore abusive sex with him was their final act on this planet. Either way, it worked out this time, and as Jane Lodge tried to leave the seedy hotel room in the early hours of the morning, Peter struck, stabbing and ripping her stomach to shreds, leaving her in a bloody heap outside Mikas's hotel room door.
Yeah.
Now, it's believed that leaving the body where it was must have caused a falling out between the pair, as Mikas was asleep when the kill happened, essentially leaving him there for police to arrest when the body was discovered. And although Mikas discovered the body first and got out of the Cavalier Hotel in time, plenty of witnesses were able to name him and give descriptions. He lived locally and was a well-known patron of the hotel, which had a reputation as being a bit of a sex den. With the description and his record, police felt like they had their man and issued warrants for a search of his apartment. Here they found pictures of nearly all the Ripper's victims, along with huge stashes of extreme hardcore pornography and drug paraphernalia. A manhunt began and Mikas Scellenda became the most wanted man in all of New York City. Now, I said we think the pair fell out after the murder of Jane Lodge, and the reason for that is Mikas's next attempted victim would again be Faye Majors, blaming her for being the first to give a clear description of him and wanting to get at Peter in some way. He broke into their shared home after seeing Peter slip out for a while. Faye, hearing a disturbance in the house, managed to give Scellenda the slip for a while, but was eventually caught. Scellenda couldn't make his mind up whether to kill her and leave or take the risk and have some fun with her first. This indecisiveness, coupled with Faye's kick-ass hide-and-seek skills, bought the girl enough time to survive again as Peter returned home, interrupting the attack and causing Mikas to flee.
Why run? Like, from your description, Mikas sounds like a tough guy. Surely he could take on the entitled little scientist.
I think he saw what Peter was capable of, and for all his faults, it seems like Mikas wasn't really able to kill like Peter. All evidence shows that Mikas raped and then took a backseat while Peter did his thing.
Okay.
This would be the last time Mikas Scellenda would be seen alive. He was found 8 days later in some wasteland. It appeared to be a suicide. He was found with a bag over his head, plastic bag over his head. The working theory was that knowing that the police were closing in on him, he panicked and killed himself. This analysis disturbed Lieutenant Williams, who was sure the man had only died 8 hours previous, not 8 days.
Why would he think 8 hours? What was so odd about it being over a week since he died?
The Ripper struck in the meantime in what would be his last but maybe most brutal kill.
Oh.
Bunch, reveling in the police's confusion, was not happy to just let Mikas take the rap and disappear into the night a free man. He continued to fuck with Lieutenant Williams every chance he got. The calls were coming in so frequent now that they had the lines ready to trace at the drop of a hat. But as you know, to get the correct reading on the perp's location, Williams would have to keep him talking for at least a minute or two, something criminals usually know and avoid at all costs. So imagine the disbelief when the Ripper called and was happy to chat for as long as the lieutenant wanted to. This stroke of luck led the police to a phone booth on the harbour in the lower west side of the city. There they found the reason for the killer's relaxed demeanour when it came to talk time on the phone. They found a long-range walkie-talkie sitting by the phone's receiver, so they were met by the mocking sounds of the seemingly demonic duck killer who promised the lead lieutenant that he would sacrifice a woman in his honour. Then he simply said, "Kitty said to say hello," and the phone line went dead.
Who's Kitty?
Kitty was a part-time sex worker who the single lieutenant used to frequent regularly. He had all units head to the new location, the home of Daniela Doria, aka Kitty. But unfortunately, they were too late with Bunch planning the death out to the second to ensure he was long gone by the time the police arrived.
You said to me earlier that this one was particularly bad.
Yeah. When police arrived, they found Kitty bound to the bed. She had her nipples removed by a razor blade, her breast sliced open with a knife, and was disemboweled in the short space of time Bunch had to act. To this day, it's seen as one of the most gruesome crimes committed by a man on a woman in New York City.
That would be his last victim.
Yeah. Things were heating up for Peter, whether he realised it or not. Because of the whole Mikas Scellenda vendetta, the idea was floated that maybe Peter and Mikas had some sort of ties or maybe even rivalry. So both Peter and Faye were closely watched by the NYPD, meaning Peter couldn't act even if he wanted to. In the meantime, Lieutenant Williams and Dr. Davis continued the investigation, now with the couple in mind as possible suspects.
Why was Faye a suspect?
Well, as the investigation went on, Davis had the thought that it might be a female killer, someone who might have had a hard time of it earlier in life and may hold a grudge against women that they would see as more pretty, beautiful, privileged, or living a better life than them.
Knowing what we know about Peter, the motive is bang on, just that it was him holding the grudge instead of Faye.
Yeah, but when they suspected Faye, they hadn't discovered Susie, so Peter didn't make sense because there was no motive.
Okay.
Faye was a suspect because when Davis had the idea of a female killer, they decided to go check her college records. There, he found that Faye had a pretty high IQ and great grades. A closer look at her file, though, would reveal that Faye would sometimes suffer from seizures and hallucinations. This led Williams and Davis to the conclusion that Faye may be the killer hallucinating her attack.
Ridiculous. What do they think? She was in a trance for every kill. Plus, they know that Scellenda was involved and he attacked Faye twice. I think that they were desperate at this stage.
Maybe. Thankfully, further investigation led them to Susie, where they learned of the girl's history, both medical and family. In the child's hospital room, they found a duck book, a duck toy, and were informed of Mr. Bunch's strange duck voice calls he made weekly to his dying daughter. This obviously was the last clue they needed to surmise that Peter Bunch was their man and was for sure the New York Ripper. After leaving the hospital, they went straight to the Bunch home to arrest Peter, where what they found when they got there validated all suspicion.
Fuck, had he killed Faye?
No, but he was seconds away from it. They found them in a pool of blood struggling over a knife. Peter had already been stabbed twice by Faye. Faye said she began to get suspicious of Peter and realised she knew very little about his life before her. A little research and snooping while Peter was working led her directly to Susie. She said that evening everything started to slip into place when she saw one of the kitchen knives had a broken tip. When she was attacked, the killer missed her when he stabbed. He hit the concrete wall behind her instead. It hit hard enough to make a spark, so it stood out in her mind, and the wall was marked where the knife had hit it.
Her evidence is a little flimsy, but at least she got there.
Well, she was told about the duck thing as well and started to put two and two together. You'd have to imagine realising the man that you live with was a psychopathic serial killer would jumble your thoughts a little bit.
Yeah.
She said when she saw the tip of the knife missing, she had a flashback to the night of her attack, realised Peter was the killer and decided to go on the offensive. She said she was in the kitchen making dinner in a bit of a daze when she saw the knife and it all fell together. Peter was in his office working. Faye now stuck in a house with a man who had tried to kill her once before and was the cause of Scellenda's 2 attempted attacks. Needless to say, the average person would panic in this situation. Now Faye, though, she grabbed the butcher knife from its place in the rack and using the line in the kitchen called Peter, who was at this point in the living room making his way to the kitchen to see what was going to be for dinner. Faye said when he picked up the phone, she involuntarily took on his duck persona to antagonize him before she knew it.
That's dodgy.
Yep. And before she knew it, she was confronted with him and stabbed him once in the chest, just missing his heart, and once in the stomach. Ooh. Peter fought with her, and as they struggled, Faye recalls him repeating in the duck voice, you're like the rest of them, beautiful and healthy, while I rotten to death in bed in a lousy, stinking hospital. So he obviously, the duck was almost Susie, you know, in his mind.
Yeah.
Williams and Davis also heard this as they entered the room, just in time for Williams to take a shot, shattering through his cheek, killing the New York Ripper, putting an end to the reign of Peter Duck Boy Bunch. Lieutenant Williams would go on to retire after this case, citing its extreme violence as a factor and the fact that the killer had made it so personal. He suffered from some PTSD, but managed to, get it together to a degree where he was able to kind of enjoy life too. So, I mean, as much as you can after being a homicide detective and living alone all your fucking life.
Yep.
On the 11th of December 2021, he died of a heart attack at the age of 92. So at least he lived a long time.
Yeah.
Even if he was constantly haunted by his career.
Throes of PTSD.
Davis went on to work for the FBI Behavioral Science Unit and still works for the Bureau to this day. Faye, well, her I have no idea about. She just kind of disappeared into the history books, which I suppose I'd do the same. Some friends said she moved to a small rural town where she wanted to live anonymously with no one knowing her past, and she still lives there to this day.
A nasty little story to finish us off before the summer break, but fun as always.
Yep. Bunch was an unsettling guy to read about, but thankfully I get to relax and reset my brain for the next 2 weeks. But don't worry, we will be back as we go on a bit of a teamed run into our first anniversary episode. Yes!
Year already. Crazy. If you can't wait 2 weeks, you know what to do. Follow us on socials at Alive Alive Pod and check out our Patreon at It's Alive Alive Pod for great shows like our Mini Monsters companion show, Real Monsters, and my great Horrific History podcast, Playing with Bones, along with classic episodes of Behind Behind the Mask and classic Real Monsters, along with early access to the whole week's mini monsters every Monday.
All that, and you get ad-free access to our main show and the weekend update, all for just $5 a month. That's on Patreon at It's Alive Pod. And now for the first 7 days, it's free. Cost you nothing to go check us out. We'll be back, not next Wednesday. We'll be back in
Sunday.
2 Wednesdays with more tales from the Horrorverse. It's Alive Podcast, all the guts and gore with none of the goods. See you all next time. Same Alive time, same Horrorverse channel. Okay, love you. Bye-bye.
Really love you. Bye-bye.